think about the sheer scale of mental health as a global issue. It's almost unbelievable sometimes. Figures suggest around 1 in 4 people will face a significant mental health challenge. And picture a classroom, maybe 30 kids.
Yeah.
Around 10%, so maybe 3 kids in that room, might be navigating life with ADHD.
It really does put it into perspective, doesn't it? Shows how common these challenges are.
Absolutely. And, well, that widespread impact is exactly why it's so important we explore all sorts of approaches, different ways to understand and support people.
Couldn't agree more.
Which brings us neatly to what we're diving deep into today, the Ayurvedic perspective on managing ADHD.
Okay.
We've been looking at this really interesting YouTube presentation by Professor Via Sanjie Kalera. He's an expert in neuropsychiatry, got over 18 years in the field.
Right, a lot of experience there.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is his MD is in Manasa Roga. That's basically Ayurveda psychiatry.
So he bridges both worlds, conventional neuropsychiatry and the Ayurvedic tradition.
Yeah.
That's quite unique.
Exactly. It gives him this, really comprehensive way to think about something like ADHD.
It certainly offers a different lens.
So today, our mission really is to unpack Professor Kalera's insights. How does Ayurveda actually approach diagnosing ADHD, thinking about its likely course, and crucially, treating it in children? We're going to try and pull out the key aspects from his presentation, give you a clear, thorough understanding of this ancient system's view, and hopefully, spark some aha moments for you listening.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Okay, so let's get right into it. How does Ayurveda actually see ADHD? What's the fundamental understanding?
Right, that's the core question. Conventionally, we think of ADHD with its main features: inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity.
And a child might have just one or a mix, right?
Exactly, any combination. Now, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, a really key factor, especially with ADHD, is seen as an increase or an elevation of Vata dosha.
Vata dosha, okay. For listeners who might know a bit about Ayurveda or maybe need a quick refresher, why is Vata so central here?
Well, Vata is the principle in Ayurveda that governs movement, energy, communication. Basically, all activity in the body and mind. Think wind, air, ether.
Okay, got it.
And Professor Kalera, he specifically highlighted several subdoshas of Vata that he often sees affected in ADHD.
Ah, okay, so it gets more specific than just general Vata.
Yes. First, there's Prana Vata. This resides in the head and governs higher mental functions like focus, concentration, memory. So an imbalance here, you can see how that directly impacts attention.
Makes sense. What else?
Then there's Samana Vata. This one's related to digestion, absorption in the gut, and interestingly, Professor Kalera mentioned seeing a link sometimes with digestive issues, like constipation, in kids with ADHD. It suggests that Mana might be off balance too.
That's an interesting connection. Not something usually linked in conventional views.
Not typically, no. Yeah. And finally, he mentioned Apana Vata, which governs downward movement, elimination, and grounding. An imbalance there could also potentially contribute to restlessness.
So it's like a specific energy pathway is getting disrupted, not just a vague Vata increase.
Precisely. It's a more nuanced picture.
Now here's where it got really interesting for me. He also brought in Sadaka Pitta and Tarpaka Kapha. What's their role in this?
Right, so Sadaka Pitta, that's a subdosha of Pitta, related to fire and transformation, is linked to processing emotions and information in the heart and brain. Think of it like the energy for mental processing and emotional balance.
Okay.
So if Sadaka Pitta is disturbed, it could maybe contribute to that mental restlessness or the emotional ups and downs sometimes seen in ADHD.
And Tarpaka Kapha is usually more about structure and lubrication, right?
Exactly. Tarpaka Kapha is specifically about nourishing the brain and nerve tissues. It provides stability, moisture. Professor Kalera emphasized that good kapha qualities are really vital during early growth and development.
So maybe a deficiency there could be a factor too, like not enough grounding or nourishment for the brain.
That's the idea, yeah. A relative lack of that nourishing, stabilizing kapha quality might also play a part in the overall picture of ADHD from this perspective.
Wow, okay. So it's this really intricate interplay of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha energies. And psychologically, how does this manifest? What does it look like in behavior?
Well, from that Ayurvedic lens, the increased Vata, especially Prana Vata, can show up as what Professor Kalera called thought hyperactivity.
Thought hyperactivity, like the mind racing.
Exactly. A mind jumping from one thing to another. This can naturally lead to, well, mental disorganization, difficulty sequencing tasks, and often that spills over into physical restlessness too.
Right.
And he made a useful distinction, between the more outwardly hyperactive type behaviors like fast thinking, maybe talking really fast, versus the more inattentive patterns.
Like daydreaming, forgetfulness.
Yes, exactly. Being easily distracted, losing things. He stressed that these can show up with different levels of intensity in different children. It's not one size fits all.
So the takeaway here is really that Ayurveda looks at this whole constellation of imbalances, mind, digestion, emotions, energy, not just the surface behaviors.
It's a great way to put it. It's a systemic view.
Okay. Now, Professor Kalera also talked about why parents might be looking for alternatives, moving away from, or wanting to complement conventional ADHD treatments. What were some of the issues he brought up?
Yeah, he definitely touched upon some significant concerns parents often have about the common medications. Things like methylphenidate, Ritalin, Concerta, that kind of thing, which are brain stimulants.
And others, too.
And others, yeah, like atomoxetine, other prefrontal cortex stimulant.
Yeah.
He mentioned specific side effects that worry parents.
Such as?
Things like disturbed sleep, which is a big one, increased anxiety, sometimes appetite suppression leading even to anorexia in some cases, and then gastrointestinal issues like stomach pain.
Yeah, those are definitely things that would make a parent pause, especially for long-term use in a child.
For sure. And it's not just the immediate side effects, is it? He also pointed out the longer-term aspect.
You mean the financial side?
Exactly. The financial burden can really add up for families. There's the ongoing cost of the primary medication, but sometimes also needing other meds like maybe relaxants or something to help with sleep, just to manage the side effects of the first drug.
Right, it can become a whole cascade.
It really can. So it creates this, ongoing strain.
So understanding those challenges, it definitely makes sense why parents might start looking into integrative options like Ayurveda or Panchakarma.
It provides context for why the interest is growing.
Now, Professor Kalera didn't just talk theory. He actually did some research on using Ayurveda for ADHD. Can you walk us through that?
Yes, he described his work on setting up a pretty rigorous study. It was designed as a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial.
Okay, the gold standard.
Right. It involved children and adolescents aged between 5 and 17 who already had an ADHD diagnosis.
And what was he comparing?
The idea was to compare Ayurvedic treatment either on its own or combined with specific diet and lifestyle changes against the placebo group. To see if the Ayurvedic approach actually made a measurable difference beyond just the placebo effect.
Crucial comparison. So what did the actual Ayurvedic intervention look like in the study?
It involved giving the children specific Ayurvedic herbal formulas, and alongside that, providing personalized advice on diet and lifestyle changes tailored to their individual Ayurvedic constitution and imbalances.
Okay. And how did they measure if it was working? What outcomes were they looking at?
They used a really comprehensive set of measures, which was good to see, trying to get that whole picture we talked about.
Like what specifically?
Well, they used standard ADHD rating scales.
Yeah.
The ones commonly used in diagnosis and monitoring.
Like the Connors scale, Vanderbilt.
Exactly. Connors 10-question scale, Dahl's ADHD scale, the NICHQ Vanderbilt assessment scale, getting reports from both parents and teachers, which is important.
Good to get multiple perspectives. What else?
They also included direct behavioral observations. They reviewed reports from, I think, 3 or 4 different teachers, looked at the kids' report cards, their school workbooks, that kind of thing.
Okay, so subjective reports and real-world performance.
Yes. And then, to get more objective data, they used specific tests. Things like reaction time tests, using a Virar chronoscope, a finger dexterity test.
Measuring actual cognitive function.
Right. Assessing division of attention span, using the Kaufman Assessment Battery for children, the KBC, to look at cognitive abilities more broadly.
Right.
And they also use something called Mind-O-Matic software.
Mind-O-Matic? What did that measure?
It assessed specific things like finger tapping speed, choice reaction time, choice discrimination. Basically trying to quantify aspects of attention, processing speed, and motor control.
Wow, that's incredibly thorough. They weren't just relying on do you feel better? They were really trying to measure changes across the board.
Exactly. It was a multifaceted approach to assessment.
So what about the specific Ayurvedic medicine they used in the study? Did he mention the ingredients?
He did. The main formulation was Saraswatarishta, but significantly without gold. He specified that.
Saraswatarishta without gold, okay.
And he emphasized it was used in a concentrated liquid form known as a kashayam, not the traditional fermented arishta or asava form.
Why the difference? Any reason given?
He mentioned preferring the concentrated, non-fermented kashayam form, especially for children. It contained a blend of well-known herbs.
Like Brahmi, Shakapushpi.
Yes, Brahmi, Shakapushpi, Vacha, Ashwagandha, Pipali, long pepper, tuak, cinnamon, ela, cardamom, ushir, vetiver, and ginger. A classic combination for cognitive support in Ayurveda.
Got it. And what about the dose and how long the kids took it for?
The dosage was calculated based on body weight, 10 milliliters per kilogram per day.
Okay.
And that total daily dose was split into 2, taken with equal water after meals. The treatment period in the study was for 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months, okay. So after all that careful setup and measurement, what did they actually find? What were the results?
Well, he mentioned they did face some challenges because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, a couple of participants had to drop out, I think 2 out of 20 initially.
Yeah, that disrupted so much research.
It really did. But despite that, Professor Kalera reported statistically significant improvements at the 3-month assessment point.
Significant compared to the placebo.
Yes, that's the key. The group getting the Ayurvedic treatment showed a noticeable reduction in the core symptoms of ADHD. So, inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity when compared directly against the placebo group.
That's really encouraging. Did he give any numbers on the improvement?
He mentioned an overall median score improvement of around 3.43 points on the rating scales, covering both the inattention and the hyperactivity impulsivity subtypes within his study group.
Okay, so measurable, statistically significant improvement versus placebo. That's quite something.
It definitely suggests a tangible effect from the Ayurvedic intervention in that controlled setting.
Now, we know Ayurveda is about much more than just herbs. It's famous for its holistic approach. What did Professor Kalera say about the role of, say, diet, yoga, lifestyle in managing ADHD?
Oh, absolutely central. He really stressed that dietary changes and lifestyle modifications are fundamental in Ayurvedic treatment. They often come first, before even stronger interventions, and they're ongoing.
The foundation, basically.
Exactly. The core idea is always to balance the doshas that are out of whack in ADHD, primarily Vata and sometimes Pitta.
Right.
So that means personalized adjustments to what you eat, when you eat, your daily routines, all tailored to the individual child's constitution, their prakriti, and their current imbalance, their vikruti.
And for ADHD specifically?
He specifically mentioned aiming for a diet that pacifies both Vata and Pitta. So think warm, grounding, nourishing foods. Regular meal times are really important for Vata balance. Avoiding processed foods, maybe too much sugar or caffeine, things that can aggravate Vata.
It's a very tailored approach, isn't it? Not just a generic, healthy diet.
Very much so. It's about what balances that specific child.
Okay, so diet and lifestyle are foundational. What other kinds of therapies does Ayurveda bring to the table for mental well-being beyond the herbs?
He outlined a really broad spectrum, actually. He categorized them using traditional terms: Adhyatmic, Adidaivic, and Adipatic.
Okay, let's break those down. Adhyatmic sounds spiritual.
It is. It relates to the mind and spirit. Practices here focus on developing inner peace, patience, self-awareness. He actually noted how these principles align quite well with modern approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and mindfulness.
Interesting parallel. Any specific practices he mentioned?
He talked about his positive experience recommending transcendental meditation, TM, for children over 7 years old. He felt it helped significantly with focus and reducing restlessness.
Okay, and Adidaivic?
Adidaivic relates more to subtle environmental or cosmic influences, you might say. This category includes things like chanting specific mantras, performing certain pujas or rituals, he mentioned. Rudra puja being beneficial for mental well-being, maybe wearing specific gemstones or colors, recitation of hymns, japa, which is repeating mantras.
So more subtle, energetic, or faith-based practices.
Yes, and also tapa, which can mean austerity or focused discipline like meditation, and homas or yagyas, which are Vedic fire ceremonies. It's a wide range.
And the last one, adhibaltic. That sounds more physical.
It is. Adipatic relates to the physical body and includes therapies we might more commonly associate with Ayurveda treatment. It covers 2 main types, Shodhana and Shamana.
Shodhana and Shamana.
Shodhana means purification. This is where panchakarma fits in the deep cleansing therapies. Shamana means pacification using herbs, diet, lifestyle to gently balance the doshas without intensive cleansing.
Right. Now, panchakarma, isn't that usually for adults or older teens?
Generally, yes. Full panchakarma is often recommended after age 7 or even later. But Professor Kalera shared something interesting from his practice.
Ooh.
He mentioned using a specific milder form of basti, which is a medicated enema called matravasti. These are small volume oil enemas.
Small oil enemas for young children.
Yes, he said he used specific oils like Masha Tailam or Mahanarayan Tailam, even for children as young as 1 or 2 years old, but in very small doses, like 2 to 5 milliliters, maybe mixed with warm cow's milk, given perhaps on alternate days.
Wow, okay, so even some purification methods adapted carefully might be used.
It seems so, in his experience, for grounding Vata.
That's a really comprehensive toolkit, from meditation and mantras to diet and specialized physical therapies.
It truly is a holistic system.
He also made a really interesting observation about differences between Ayurvedic practice in North versus South India. What was that about?
Yes, that was a fascinating cultural nuance he shared. Based on his personal observations, he noted some variations in how Ayurveda is practiced regionally.
And he had a preference.
He expressed a personal preference for the South Indian tradition. He perceived it as generally more focused on plant-based remedies, really emphasizing purity, what they call sattvic qualities, and often having a very strong spiritual connection integrated into the practice.
Okay, more plant-focused, sattvic, spiritual, and North India.
He briefly mentioned that North Indian practices sometimes seem to incorporate herbo-mineral preparations more readily. This can include formulations containing metals, like gold.
Ah, like Swarna Prashana, the gold drops for babies.
Exactly. That's a practice perhaps more emphasized in some northern traditions, used for cognitive development in newborns. So it's just an interesting distinction he observed in emphasis.
Yeah, that is interesting. Something to be aware of, perhaps, if you're seeking out a practitioner.
Potentially, depending on what resonates with you.
So finally, let's look at the bigger picture. What about the long term? And what further research is really needed here?
Well, Professor Kalera himself pointed out the need for more research. Specifically, studies with really standardized treatment protocols so everyone's getting a consistent intervention and, crucially, longer-term follow-up.
Right, to see if the benefits last.
Exactly. We need to understand the sustained effectiveness of these Ayurvedic approaches for ADHD over months and years.
Did he have any long-term data from his own patients?
His ability to do systematic long-term follow-up was apparently limited, partly because he relocated. However, he did mention anecdotally that many of his clients had reported continued improvement.
Oh, really? Like how much improvement?
He estimated that many reported maybe a 40 to 50% sustained reduction in their initial symptoms, even after stopping active treatment.
Wow, 40-50% reduction reported long-term. That's pretty significant, even if it's anecdotal at this stage.
It certainly suggests promising potential, doesn't it? Again, it really underscores the need for more rigorous longitudinal studies to confirm those kinds of outcomes.
Definitely. Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. This deep dive into Professor Kalera's work, it really highlights how Ayurveda offers this truly holistic view of ADHD. The focus is clearly on addressing those underlying imbalances, especially in Vata dosha, but considering Pitta and Kapha too.
Right, the whole system balance.
And his research, while it's preliminary and needs expanding, it does give some concrete evidence for the potential benefits of specific herbs. But maybe more importantly, it reinforces the absolute vital role of personalized diet, lifestyle.
And that whole spectrum of other integrative therapies, from meditation to potentially even adapted purification techniques. It's a multi-pronged approach.
And when you think back to what he said about the challenges with conventional treatments, the side effects, the costs, you can really see why these kinds of alternative or complementary approaches feel quite compelling, quite intriguing for many families searching for answers.
It offers a different framework, different tools, and perhaps fewer of those specific side effects parents worry about.
It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Given how complex ADHD is with all its different facets, could the most effective, maybe the most compassionate path forward actually involve blending the best of both worlds?
You mean integrating Ayurvedic wisdom with our current scientific understanding?
Yeah. Could that kind of integrated approach offer the most personalized, the most comprehensive support plan for kids and their families? It's definitely something to think about.
A very important question for the future of care, I think.
Absolutely. So if this deep dive has sparked your interest, and we hope it has, definitely feel encouraged to explore this further. You could look into those Ayurvedic concepts we touched on, the doshas, the sub-doshas. Maybe delve deeper into Professor Kalera's specific work. His center's website was mentioned. NAYA, the Center for Special AEL Children and Neuropsychiatry.
And why, right?
Yeah. Or, perhaps research qualified Ayurvedic practitioners in your own local area if this resonates with you.
Good starting points.
Because really, this conversation is just scratching the surface of a very deep and important topic. We hope you'll continue learning right along with us.